It all began in 2008, when Marvel released Iron Man in their plan to recreate the idea of a cinematic universe. No one could have possibly imagined that eventually, this one hit would spawn an 11-year legacy of storytelling that would define an entire generation of audiences in film. This was the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Over the course of its run, the MCU has been through a lot of different experiences. Some good, some not so good. But one thing was for certain, it was all leading up to one simple moment. The reign of Thanos, the Mad Titan. The build-up to Infinity War was intense, where this one film would have to take all of the elements from every movie that came before it and fit it into a single 2.5-hour movie. It had to work with all the different directors, writing decisions, and story beats of at least 18 other movies. And somehow it actually worked. Infinity War was a huge hit, with millions of people around the world falling in love with its character, story, and shockingly bittersweet conclusion. It was everything that you could possibly want from a superhero movie. So you could probably imagine that this put a lot more pressure on Endgame, the official conclusion to the Infinity Saga. It had to do everything that Infinity War did and even more. And as the final film in this 3-phase series, I can safely say that Avengers Endgame is the greatest movie ever made, and I will fight you to the death to prove it. Before we get started, I should probably tell you that this isn't going to be a really detailed review of the movie, but I don't think that it should be either. The film just came out in theaters, and I obviously don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. What I can tell you is that it does absolutely everything perfectly. The characters are perfect, the interactions are perfect, the music is perfect, the action is perfect, the pacing, the tone, the build-up, the ending, all of it is just perfect. It is just everything that you could possibly want from a movie. Not just a superhero movie, not just a conclusion to a 22-movie series, just as a movie. Though it is recommended, like highly recommended, that you do watch every single entry of the MCU to better understand what's going on and who these characters are. But whether you have or haven't caught up with the MCU, this movie still has something for everyone to enjoy. It works as a standalone movie and as a conclusion to the MCU on so many levels. In all my years of watching movies, I just never had such a feeling of fulfillment as I did by the time that I got to the final scenes of this film. The story, while it may not be grand or epic in the same way a lot of other MCU movies were, is still fun to sit through. And it's basically because it's made very easy to digest. The narrative is allowed to be simple because all of the complicated stuff has already happened in the other movies. It paces itself out very well. There's no instances where the movie feels like it's going too fast or too slow. It's done in such a way that even if you didn't take the time to see the other movies, you still get a good idea as to who these people are, what they value, and what motivates them. It's tight, it's well-grounded, and it never feels overwhelming. I think what helps to make the story so immersive is that the stakes that it presents are way bigger than they've ever been before. It's a scenario where the Avengers have been completely defeated and they have to cope with the fact that Thanos beat them. This isn't the same as we have to stop the villain from winning. In this scenario, the villain has won. A good chunk of the film is seeing all the different ways the heroes try to live new lives after the snap, and all the different methods of coping feel unique to each character. The paths in life they end up going make sense for each of them, from Banner accepting his duality with the Hulk, to Hawkeye punishing criminals in a failing attempt to cope with the loss of his family. We get to see them out of their element, and it's done in a way that serves a purpose in the story. The film has a smart method of getting everyone together, and it's fun to see all of them work off each other. The chemistry between these characters has a loose flow to it that allows you to see them in a casual way, so you don't necessarily have to be familiar with the other movies to enjoy watching these people interact. They're funny, wholehearted, but in a way that isn't condescending. There's all sorts of moments between them that steadily build up the dynamic of their relationships, and each one feels important to where each character ends up by the end of the movie. It's made even better by the fact that the movie manages to maintain a solid sense of tone. I've seen the trailers for the movie, and the impression that I got was that it was going to be a dark and mellow story about the Avengers' final desperate stand against Thanos. But surprisingly, it's a very lighthearted film most of the time. It has an innocent sense of humor, but it also understands the urgency of the plot and its characters. It would have been really easy to just make it depressing all the way through, considering half the population is dead and so many beloved characters are gone, but it's actually nothing like that at all. It's never too dark and gritty, but it never gets too silly and funny either. It's a perfect balance of emotion that manages to stay consistent throughout the entire movie. One thing that really surprised me was how the concept of time travel was handled in this movie. Normally I don't like time travel stories because almost every single time it's done, done, it implies or introduces a very confusing element that's constantly distracting from the experience. You'd ask yourself how the hell this is supposed to work, or shouldn't these side effects be occurring, and all sorts of other things that just get in the way of the story. But this movie finds a way to present it in a way that's easy to follow. They don't bring up any complicated stuff and set ground rules for how the time travel works, so you're able to follow it without any confusion. It also has a really clever way of taking elements from previous movies and incorporating them into this one. I won't spoil how they do it, but trust me, it's actually really well thought out. The humor is also pretty good. Not every joke is going to be so funny that you laugh out loud or slap a knee, but the comedic tone they end up using still works in this movie's favor. Each joke is delivered by a character whose style of humor fits organically with each joke they deliver. Unlike The Last Jedi, where all the jokes were poorly translated by characters who shouldn't be translating them, this movie picks the right characters for each bit of comedy. So even if you don't find it funny, you don't find it annoying or cringe-inducing either. It also has good timing, so you don't get the feeling that the jokes are desperately trying to make you laugh, thus distracting you from the story. It's difficult to have a moment in the movie where it wants to be funny, but not in a way that's incredibly obvious, and I respect a film when it's done well. And I have a lot of respect for Endgame because it does this particular thing very well. They may not be the best jokes I've ever seen, but they're jokes that feel appropriate for this movie, so the comedy is allowed to feel more genuine. Despite there being a huge amount of build-up in the movie with a lot going on, it never ends up feeling lost in its own ambition. It would have been easy to get lost or distracted between all of the jumps to all these different subplots going on, but because of how tight the pacing is, the film is able to hold itself together. It stays focused on what it needs to do, which makes the final battle even more satisfying and fun to watch. And speaking of which, without giving anything away, the final battle in this movie is the craziest shit you will ever see in your entire life. I guarantee it. It's huge, it's got a lot going on, but it also manages to be evenly paced so you don't miss any cool details. Each hero and villain gets their own badass scene of glory, and it manages to work in even more brilliant character interactions and well-timed humor. What makes this battle feel so grand and epic is that it really feels like every single thing has been building up to this very moment, both in the entirety of the MCU and in the movie's self-contained plotline. The directing and choreography of the fighting allows it to feel like a grand final battle and thoroughly explore the full potential of each of these fighters. It manages to pull off every cool trick you can think of while grounding its elements in a satisfying way. Finally, you have the epilogue where we get the final fate of each and every character we've been introduced to up to this point. Granted, we all knew that characters killed by the snap were gonna come back because Marvel wanted to advertise future movies too early, but the ending of the movie and a few scenes in the middle of the movie still managed to pull off some twists and turns to make you feel shocked and surprised by the end result. There are characters who don't make it out alive by the end, and while I won't tell you who ends up permanently dying, it will be a huge gut punch to your feels when it happens. And with all the tight pacing and brilliant writing working side by side, Endgame's final moments manage to be absolutely perfect. The ending they give to this movie is one of the most perfect endings you will ever see in a movie. And what makes this ending so perfect is that every character gets the ideal conclusion to their arc. It provides a bittersweet but hopeful sense of closure to all of them while keeping the film from feeling overcrowded with a huge roster of characters at the end. My personal favorite is the one that happens to Captain America. Once again, I won't spoil what happens, but the conclusion that Captain America gets to his character arc had me bawling uncontrollably. It is so beautiful and such a brilliant callback to one of the previous movies that I honestly can't think of any way that it could have been done better. But aside from that, Endgame manages to tie up virtually every single loose end over the last 20 movies. It's just the perfect conclusion for all of these movies and all of these characters. Honestly, I think the MCU should just end with this movie because of just how wholesome and satisfying it is as a conclusion and how it comes together so well. Anything after the movie would end up just taking away from what makes this epilogue so special. That's how absolutely perfect this ending is. I guess if I had one problem with the movie, it would have to be the way that Thanos is handled. Now, on some level, I completely understand why this ended up happening because the Thanos that we get here is completely different from the Thanos that we got in Infinity War, and the movie provides a sound explanation for why that is. But it still comes across as really generic. This film doesn't maintain the same grasp Infinity War did with Thanos, so he ends up losing the humanity aspect of his character and just turns into any other Marvel villain. Something ends up happening in the movie that causes him to shift his motivations, and I really don't like how it's handled. And the reason why it's not handled well is because it takes away all of the elements that made Thanos such a phenomenal antagonist. His personality and background were so detailed and transparent that it didn't matter what lines he crossed to meet his goal. And even when he does some of the most awful things, like sacrificing his daughter, he still feels so humble and believable. They avoided just making him into a heartless enemy and made him into an actual human being. The scene where he talks with Doctor Strange shows how he was a man of reason and wanted to avoid conflict. He wanted to talk things over and peacefully sway the Avengers on his side. It's one of those scenes that doesn't get as much attention as others, but it's one of my favorite scenes from that movie because it was so important to fleshing out his character. The Thanos that we get in Endgame doesn't have any of those qualities. He just comes across as the typical power-hungry villain who wants to destroy everything. And after the amazing Thanos that we got in Infinity War, that's not gonna be impressive to anyone. But honestly, it's just a really minor problem in what's otherwise an absolutely astounding movie. It was a near impossible challenge to deliver on all the expectations audiences would have for this film over the course of 11 years. But somehow they managed to pull off that exact impossibility. The way this film manages to so thoroughly deliver on all the world building from 21 other films while telling a coherent narrative is hypnotizing and a severe rarity in the genre. It had me going from an excited little kid to an emotional wreck in the absolute best ways. It's remarkably realized and thankfully free of any distracting or predictable tropes. It has a grand scope while also feeling intimate, and I really can't think of a lot of other movies that manage to get this right. It's a roller coaster of emotion from beginning to end, and without question one of the best, if not the best movie I've ever seen in my life. To think that all this ended up happening because a guy named Stan Lee decided to make some comic books actually really speaks to me. I may not have known him as much as a lot of other people did, but it's really telling the impact that his work has left behind. He paved the way for so many great ideas and opportunities in the comic book industry and media in general, to the point that I really don't think it's going to be the same without him. I honestly feel bad for not recognizing his cameo because I really wanted to get that wholesome feeling that I'd be seeing him one last time, knowing that he was there alongside us right from the beginning and managed to be there at the very end. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has garnished a huge reputation over the years, but I honestly can't imagine how any of it would have turned out if anyone but Stan Lee was the one who made it all possible. He was a man of talent, ideas, and ambition, and he had a good heart to carry out his goals and make a difference in people's lives. I think it goes without saying that my favorite Marvel hero is Stan Lee himself because he just embodies so many qualities a hero should have, possibly all of them. He inspired people to be the best that they can be, and he influenced an entire culture with his brilliance and desire to make a difference. And it ended up giving us the MCU, one of the biggest cultural phenomena in the history of media. And it really deserves the reputation it's received because it was all made possible by this one man. Avengers Endgame is a perfect movie in just about every single way I can possibly describe it, and I have Stan Lee to thank for that. I know that we all like to talk about heroes, but we should never forget that he was the one who gave us those heroes. And in turn, I think that makes him the biggest hero of all. As we close out of this video, I hope this movie stands as an example for just how much his work meant to people. I hope it stands as the magnum opus for people to remember all of the goodness he brought into the world, and hopefully, the legacy that will live on because of what he made. Thank you for watching my review of Endgame. It might not have been a detailed one, but that's what you gotta do to avoid spoilers. If you liked what you saw here, you can feel free to support me on Patreon so I can continue to make more videos like this. Every little bit helps, and I'm always grateful to people who support my work. So until next time, take care of yourselves and stay awesome. Excelsior!